Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. I had been driving since early morning, trying to put as many miles behind me as I could. The road had stretched endlessly, empty highways flanked by flat fields and the occasional rundown gas station. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, my back ached and my eyes were dry from staring into the setting light. I passed a faded sign for a cheap motel that promised low rates and vacancy. With my legs sore and my mind foggy, I decided to stop for the night. The parking lot was cracked and uneven, with weeds pushing up between the concrete. A buzzing street light cast a yellow glow over the entrance. Inside, the front desk looked like it had not been updated in decades, with faded wallpaper and a bell that barely made a sound when I pressed it. The man behind the counter looked half asleep but managed a nod as he handed me a key. My room was on the ground floor, tucked in a corner of the L-shaped building. The bed was lumpy and the air conditioner groaned louder than it cooled, but it was a place to sleep. I tossed my bag on the chair, kicked off my shoes and stretched out, not even bothering to unpack. The place had a strange smell, something stale mixed with bleach, like they were trying to cover up years of wear and tear. I turned on the television to drown out the creaks and hums of the place. After flipping through static-filled channels, I left it on some news report and closed my eyes. I do not remember falling asleep, but I woke suddenly to a sharp sound. It was late, well past midnight, the screen now showing a test pattern with a high-pitched tone. I was about to shut it off when I heard it again, this time more clearly. A scream. A woman's scream, sharp and terrified, coming from the room next door. I froze, unsure if I had really heard it. The walls were thin, and I could make out the sound of footsteps, quick and uneven, followed by a thump. I stood by the door, heart pounding, trying to listen. Then I heard the scream again, shorter this time, more like a cry for help. Without thinking, I opened my door and stepped out into the corridor. The night air was cold and the place was silent aside from the hum of the neon motel sign. I walked to the room next to mine and listened. Nothing. I knocked lightly at first, then harder when no one responded. The door was locked and no light showed through the crack at the bottom. I rushed to the front desk, where the same man from earlier now sat watching a small black and white television. He looked up, annoyed that I had disturbed him. I told him what I had heard, that someone was screaming in the room next to mine. He frowned and typed something into the computer. "Well, that room is empty," he said, glancing at the screen. No one checked in there tonight. I insisted he come look anyway, that I had definitely heard someone. He sighed, grabbing a key and muttering that this place always attracted weirdos. I followed him back down the hallway, my pulse still racing. He knocked once before unlocking the door. The room was dark, untouched, the bed still neatly made, no signs of anyone inside. He flicked on the light, revealing dust motes floating through the air and a faint, musty smell. Nothing seemed disturbed, and after a few seconds he looked at me like I had wasted his time. I apologized and said maybe I had been dreaming. He left without another word, locking the door again behind him. I went back to my room, still shaken. I tried to convince myself it had been some weird dream brought on by exhaustion. But sleep would not come, and I lay there for hours, ears straining for any sound. Around 3 a.m., I heard something again. Not a scream this time, but a soft whimper, like someone crying quietly. I sat up, unsure if I was losing my mind. The sound was faint, muffled, and definitely coming from the same room. I stepped outside again, this time pressing my ear against the door. There was definitely someone in there. I heard breathing, and then a whisper, though I could not make out the words. My stomach twisted with dread. I did not want to go back to the front desk again, not if he would just brush me off. I knocked lightly, then called out to ask if they were okay. Silence. The crying stopped. I waited, but no one replied. After a few minutes, I went back inside and locked the door behind me. I left the television on for the rest of the night, volume low, just to fill the silence. Every creak made me jump, and I counted the hours until sunrise. When morning finally came, I packed quickly and went to check out. A different person was at the desk now, a younger woman who seemed more alert than the man from last night. I asked her if anyone had checked into the room next to mine since I was still unsettled. She looked at the computer and confirmed what I already knew. No one had stayed there for days. I asked if there had ever been complaints about strange noises in that room. Her expression changed slightly, like I had touched on something familiar. She hesitated before saying there had been a few guests who claimed to hear things, cries, voices, but the room always checked out empty. She said it was probably just the old plumbing or noise echoing from nearby. I left the motel feeling more confused than frightened. The road stretched ahead, but I kept glancing at the rearview mirror as the motel faded behind me. The more I thought about it, the more I started to doubt my own memory. Maybe it really was exhaustion or a vivid dream. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But something did not sit right. I kept replaying the sounds in my mind, the tone of the screams, the timing of the cries. They felt real, too real to be imagined. But still, there was no proof, no signs of anything unusual in that room. A few days later, I stopped in a small diner while passing through another town. I struck up a conversation with the server, just to pass the time. I mentioned the motel and the strange experience, trying to laugh it off. Her smile faltered, and she asked which motel it was. When I told her, her eyes widened a little. She said that place had a reputation. A woman had gone missing there a few years ago, last seen checking into one of the rooms on that same hallway. No one ever found out what happened to her. People said the room was cursed, but it was probably just rumors. She told me not to worry, and that it was probably just my mind playing tricks on me. That could have been the end of it, and for a while I tried to forget. But one night, while cleaning out my bag, I found the motel receipt. It had my room number and the date, but something else caught my eye. A faint print mark next to the room number, like the ink had smeared. I held it up to the light, and I swear it looked like a fingerprint. Small, delicate, not mine. I could not explain it, but I did not feel fear. Instead, I felt something closer to peace. Maybe that scream was real. Maybe someone had been trying to be heard, even if no one else believed it. And maybe, just maybe, by listening, I helped in some way. Even if I never understood what really happened, I carried that moment with me. The road has taken me many places since then, but I never stayed at a motel without checking both sides of the room. I listen more closely now, not just for sounds, but for things people overlook. I do not know who she was or what she went through, but I heard her, and I will never forget that. Story 2. I was walking home from my night shift, the streets dimly lit by a few flickering lamps and the occasional porch light. The air was damp from an earlier rain, the kind that soaked through shoes and clung to clothes long after it stopped. The streets were mostly empty, and the only sounds I heard were my own footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I always took this route, cutting through quieter side streets to avoid the main road where traffic and drunks sometimes gathered. At first, I did not notice the car. It was only when I turned a corner and glanced over my shoulder that I saw headlights creeping behind me. The car kept a good distance, not too close to seem alarming, but not far enough to ignore. I turned back, thinking it might just be a coincidence. People drove slowly through the neighborhood all the time, especially at this hour. I kept walking, trying not to let my imagination get ahead of me. The car continued to follow at the same pace, making the same turns I did, maintaining that same quiet distance. My heart started to race a little, and I felt the urge to pick up my pace, but I forced myself to stay calm. I did not want to assume anything without being sure. I told myself maybe the driver was just lost or looking for an address. I made an abrupt left turn without signaling it by my body language, just to see what would happen. The car turned too. That was the moment I felt a true ripple of fear rise up from my stomach. I was not being paranoid. Someone was definitely following me, and they wanted to stay unnoticed. I could hear the tires crunch softly on the wet road as the vehicle crawled along behind me. I considered ducking into a yard or knocking on a door, but I was still several blocks from any homes where I knew the people. Most houses on this stretch were dark, curtains drawn, no sign of life. I hated how deserted it felt, like I had stepped into a pocket of the city that time had forgotten. My steps quickened without my consent, and I felt my hands begin to tremble. I had pepper spray in my bag, but it would take time to find it. The car suddenly picked up speed for a second, then slowed down again, now only a few car lengths behind me. I felt trapped in that moment, unsure whether to run, scream, or act like nothing was happening. I veered right into an alleyway between two apartment buildings, hoping it would throw the driver off. My shoes slapped against the damp pavement, my breath growing louder in my ears. I did not look back until I had made it halfway through the alley. The car did not follow me in, but it pulled up to the entrance and stopped, headlights shining down the narrow passage. My chest pounded so hard I could hear it echo inside my skull. I kept moving, pushing my legs to go faster until I reached the other side. I darted across another street and hid behind a large trash bin near a fence, crouching low to stay hidden. The alley emptied into a different neighborhood, and I hoped I had finally lost whoever was tailing me. Minutes passed like hours as I sat there, listening, waiting. The car did not reappear, and the neighborhood remained quiet. I finally stood up, cautiously, and continued walking, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the main roads. I stayed alert, checking every few steps to make sure no headlights appeared. My body was tense, ready to run if I needed to. When I reached the next intersection, I saw a late-night bus approaching, its lights like a beacon in the darkness. It was not going my way, but I waved it down anyway. The driver hesitated, then opened the doors. I stepped on board and asked if I could just ride to the next stop for safety. The driver looked concerned but nodded, telling me to sit behind him. I rode in silence, heart still hammering, eyes scanning out the window for any sign of that car. We drove for about 10 minutes before I asked to be let out near a well-lit gas station. I thanked the driver, stepped off the bus, and walked inside to calm myself. The clerk gave me a look, probably sensing something was wrong, but did not ask. I stayed there for a while, pretending to browse until I felt ready to go. The walk from the gas station to my home was longer, but it was through busier streets. Bars passed by regularly, and I stuck close to stores and places still open. I checked over my shoulder a few times, but the car never showed up again. The closer I got to home, the more I allowed myself to breathe normally. My legs ached, and my shoulders burned from being so tense. When I finally reached my door and locked it behind me, I leaned against it and let out a shaky sigh. I dropped my bag on the floor, kicked off my wet shoes, and walked straight to the kitchen for a glass of water. My hands were still trembling slightly, but I felt safe now. I double-checked all the locks and turned on the outside lights. I knew I would not sleep easy that night, but at least I was home. Later, lying in bed, I thought about what had happened. Maybe it was a random driver who changed their mind, or maybe it was something worse. I did not want to dwell on it, but I also knew I needed to be more cautious. I promised myself to start getting rides home or using trusted transport from now on. It was not worth the risk. The next day, I reported the incident to the local precinct, giving them the details I could remember. I did not catch the license plate, but I gave a description of the car and the timing. The officer took my statement seriously and told me they would keep an eye out. That gave me some comfort, even though I knew the chances of finding the driver were low. Still, it felt like I had taken back some control. That week, I told a few coworkers what happened, and one of them offered to give me rides home when we shared shifts. It was a small gesture, but it made a big difference. I realized how easily fear could isolate someone, but also how small acts of kindness could bring you back from that edge. I began carrying my pepper spray in my pocket instead of buried in my bag. I also signed up for a self-defense class the following month. Over time, the fear faded into memory, replaced by a stronger sense of caution and preparedness. I no longer walked those quiet streets alone at night. I took the lessons seriously, without letting them consume me. Life kept moving, and so did I, only now with more awareness of the shadows around me. I never saw that car again, but I never forgot it either. Each night I stepped into the light of my doorway now felt like a quiet victory. I knew how easily things could go wrong, how quickly a normal walk could turn into something terrifying. But I also knew I was not powerless. I made it home that night, and I would make it home every time after that too. Story 3. I arrived late in the evening after a long day of travel. The ride from the station had been quiet, and the driver barely spoke a word, dropping me off at the front of a modest 2-story house listed on a popular house-sharing app. The room I booked was upstairs, at the end of the hallway, with a small private bathroom and a desk by the window. It seemed clean enough, with fresh linens and a locked door. I had been excited to have a quiet night alone to rest and prepare for meetings the next day. After taking a warm shower and setting my bag by the closet, I settled into the bed with my phone. I scrolled through messages, answered a few emails, and then spent time watching short videos to wind down. The lights were dim, and the only sound was the occasional creak of the house as it settled. I dozed off sometime around midnight, barely noticing anything strange about the room. Everything appeared normal, nothing seemed out of place. Around 3 a.m. I woke up suddenly, unsure why. There was no noise, no lights, just a cold stillness that hung in the air. I sat up and looked around, wondering if something had disturbed my sleep. My eyes scanned the dark room until they landed on a small red light near the corner of the ceiling, It was faint, barely visible, unless you looked straight at it. I stood up and approached it, pulling a chair under it to get a better look. It was a camera, small and hidden inside a smoke detector that looked like it belonged there. My heart raced as I climbed down and turned on every light in the room. I began checking every corner, every fixture, and every object that could potentially hide something. In total, I found 3 hidden devices, all with tiny lenses pointing directly into the room. Panic set in fast, my hands shaking as I unplugged the Wi-Fi router in the hallway and returned to my room. I grabbed my phone and looked up the house sharing app's emergency line, placing a call immediately. It took a few minutes, but I got through and explained the situation, trying to stay calm. They assured me they would escalate it and told me to leave immediately for my own safety. I packed up my things with trembling hands, barely able to think straight. I left the house before 4 a.m., dragging my suitcase behind me in the quiet darkness. I walked a few blocks to a nearby gas station and asked the clerk if I could stay inside until sunrise. He let me sit by the counter, offering me a coffee and asking if everything was all right. I told him I just needed a safe place for a while. He did not ask many questions, and I appreciated that. When daylight came, I booked a room in a well-reviewed hotel across town and took a cab there as soon as I could. I spent the rest of the morning reporting everything to the app and filing a police report at the local station. The officers there took it seriously, especially after I showed them the pictures I had taken of the cameras. They wrote everything down, took copies of the images, and told me an investigation would begin immediately. I felt a little safer knowing it was now in their hands. The house sharing app followed up later that day, confirming that the listing had been suspended and the host was being investigated. They refunded my payment and offered to cover the hotel expenses for the next few nights. I accepted, relieved to have somewhere safe to stay. Even so, the thought of someone watching me while I slept made my skin crawl. I kept checking around my new room out of habit, making sure every outlet, smoke detector, and vent was clear. It was difficult to rest that night, despite how comfortable and secure the hotel was. I kept the lights on and the curtains drawn tight. I did not sleep much, constantly jolting awake at every small sound. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the red light from the ceiling, blinking quietly like an eye watching from the dark. I told myself over and over that I was safe now, but it took time to believe it. The next day, I received a message from the local police saying they had visited the house and confirmed the presence of surveillance equipment. They told me they were in the process of identifying the host and determining whether this had happened to other guests. I felt a wave of relief knowing I had trusted my instincts and reported it before anything worse could happen. I gave them everything I knew and offered to testify if needed. I tried to return to my original schedule, attending the meetings I had traveled for, though my mind often drifted. I kept thinking about how easily I could have missed the cameras. If I had not woken up at that hour or noticed the small red light, I might never have known. The thought that someone else might have gone through it without realizing made me feel sick. I kept reminding myself that I had done the right thing. At the end of the week, I received a call from the investigating officer. They informed me that the host had been taken into custody and charged with several offenses related to illegal surveillance and privacy violations. They also said that more guests had come forward after the listing was taken down, some with their own disturbing discoveries. It was a terrible situation, but knowing that justice was being served helped me breathe a little easier. The house sharing app issued a public statement about the incident, outlining new measures they would implement to prevent similar situations in the future. They offered personal apologies to all affected users and promised to increase inspection standards and support systems. I was grateful they took action quickly and did not try to downplay the situation. Their response gave me some reassurance about using the platform again in the future, though I would be far more cautious. I finished my trip without any more incidents and returned home safely. It took a few days to feel completely normal again, but slowly I settled back into my routine. I talked about it with close friends who were just as shocked and angry about what happened. They helped me feel supported and less alone in dealing with the aftermath. The experience left me wary, but not broken. I now carry a small camera detector when I travel and always inspect every place I stay in. It has become a routine for me, something I do without hesitation. I learned that it is better to be safe and overly cautious than to assume everything is fine. The world has good people in it, but there are always those with bad intentions. Trusting my instincts saved me, and I will never ignore them again. This whole experience taught me a valuable lesson about personal safety and awareness. It showed me the importance of speaking up when something feels wrong. The fear I felt that night was real, but so was the strength that followed. I handled it, survived it, and helped stop someone from hurting others. In the end, I walked away smarter, stronger, and a little more prepared for whatever comes next. Story 4. It started like any other shift. I had just dropped off my last passenger near a shopping complex when the next ride pinged on my phone. The pickup location was only a few blocks away, so I tapped accept and made a quick turn. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and a thin layer of fog hovered along the edges of the road. I adjusted the mirror and checked the dashboard before pulling up to the address. The person waiting by the curb looked ordinary. A hoodie, jeans, sneakers. They stepped in quietly and offered a polite greeting, one of those mumbled kinds that didn't quite feel warm or cold. I gave a quick nod and confirmed the destination, which was listed as an address downtown. It was about a 20-minute drive, mostly along well-lit roads. We drove in silence for a while. Every few minutes I would glance at the mirror and catch them watching the road with this blank expression. Nothing alarming, just distant. Then about 10 minutes into the drive, they leaned forward a little and asked if I could take a different route. They claimed they needed to stop by a warehouse to pick up something important. I hesitated. It was not part of the original request, and we were heading in the opposite direction. I asked for the new address and typed it into my phone. It was further out than I expected, way past the industrial zone and near a closed-down shipping dock. Something about it felt strange, but they said they would tip well and apologized for the sudden change. Part of me wanted to say no and stick to the scheduled trip. Another part, the one used to tight budgets and late bills, was already imagining the extra money. I told myself it was just a warehouse and nothing would happen in such a short stop. So I nodded and changed course. The fog was thickening by the minute as we drove farther from the familiar roads. We passed fewer and fewer buildings. Street lights became scarce, and the silence in the car grew heavier. I tried to make small talk, asking what they were picking up, but the response was vague. Something about a forgotten package and helping a friend. My grip on the steering wheel tightened without me realizing it. As we neared the warehouse district, I noticed most of the buildings were either abandoned or dark. The address led to a narrow road with a locked gate at the end. The passenger told me to turn right instead and follow a dirt path just off the main road. My gut told me this was a bad idea, but my mouth asked if they were sure. They said yes with a calmness that did not match the situation. I stopped the car just before the path. I said I was not comfortable going further without knowing exactly what we were doing. They paused, then smiled and said it would only take a minute, that I could wait in the car. That smile made my skin crawl. It was the kind of smile people wore when they knew something you did not. I told them to give me the package location and I would wait outside the gate. I even offered to stay on the phone while they went inside. They kept insisting I drive further in, just around the corner, just past the trees. The calmness in their voice did not sit right with me. My instincts were screaming by then. I put the car in reverse and slowly backed up to the main road. They did not argue or try to stop me, which made it feel even worse. It was as if they had expected me to say no but hoped I would not. I drove back to the wider road and stopped under the nearest streetlight. My hands were sweating and my heart pounded. They sat silently for a few seconds before asking if I could at least let them off there. I refused. I told them I would take them back to the original route or to the nearest police station. They said nothing after that, just stared out the window while I turned the car around. The rest of the ride was quiet. I dropped them off near a bus station without another word. They stepped out slowly, glanced back once, and disappeared into the crowd. I locked the doors right after and stayed parked for a few minutes to calm my nerves. Later that night, I checked the warehouse address online. There had been police reports tied to that area. Missing persons. Suspicious activity. No arrests had ever been made, but several rideshare drivers had reported being asked to go there under strange circumstances. I submitted a report through the app and added my details to the growing list. I thought about that night for a long time. I kept wondering what would have happened if I had driven just a little farther. If I had let them lead me off the map. It taught me something important about listening to that quiet voice inside, the one that warns you even when nothing looks wrong. Since then, I made some changes. I added a dash camera, tightened my driving hours, and set rules for mid-ride destination changes. No detours outside the city, no exceptions. I needed to feel in control again. People often talk about instincts like they are just emotional noise. But they are not. They are survival tools. That night reminded me of that in a way I will never forget. It could have gone differently. I could have ignored the signs. I could have trusted the wrong person because they looked ordinary. But I did not, and I am still here because of that. That ride was a turning point. It did not stop me from driving, but it made me smarter about it. More careful, more alert. There is no extra tip worth losing your safety over. I finished the night shift like usual. Picked up a few more passengers, dropped them off safely, and made it home before midnight. I held my keys tighter than usual and double-checked my door locks before going to bed. Sleep came slower than normal, but eventually it came. I woke up the next day ready for another shift. The sky was clear and the roads were busy. The fear from the night before had faded, replaced with caution. A better kind of awareness, one I knew would keep me safer for the long road ahead. Story 5. I joined a local jogging group to help with my motivation. Running alone had lost its charm, and I hoped the social aspect would push me to be consistent. The group met 3 times a week at the park near my neighborhood. Everyone seemed nice enough, a mix of all ages and skill levels. We would jog, stretch, sometimes chat for a few minutes, and then part ways. One man in particular always seemed a little too eager. He would linger after the runs, always asking personal questions. I brushed it off at first, thinking he was just friendly or trying to be polite. Over time, he began to remember details about my life that I barely recalled telling him. It started to make me feel uneasy. I tried to keep my distance during the runs, joining different subgroups or arriving late so I would not be near him. It helped for a while, but he was persistent. He began waiting for me in the parking lot, offering water bottles or energy bars like it was part of some routine. I kept my responses short and made excuses to leave quickly. One evening, I came back from grocery shopping to find him standing outside my house. I froze in my driveway, unsure of what to say. He smiled and said he was just passing by and thought he would say hello. My heart pounded in my chest, and I tried to stay calm. I thanked him awkwardly and went inside, locking the door behind me. I convinced myself that maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe he had other friends in the area or errands nearby. But the next day, he showed up again. This time he brought coffee and stood on my porch like it was completely normal. I did not answer the door, just watched him through the blinds until he finally left. That weekend, I skipped the group jog. I did not want to run into him, and I needed space to think. I was scared but also frustrated that I had to miss something I enjoyed because of someone else. My instinct told me to block him, but I had never even given him my number. He must have found my address through group chats or mutual friends online. I talked to one of the organizers discreetly, explaining that I had concerns about a member's behavior. She was kind and understanding, assuring me she would handle it carefully. I appreciated that, though part of me worried it would only make things worse. I started parking a block away from my home, just in case he was watching. Every little sound at night made me tense. He returned a few days later, knocking on my door in the late afternoon. This time he looked annoyed, asking why I had not been at the jog. I opened the door only slightly, standing behind the screen. I told him directly that I was not comfortable with him visiting me and asked him not to come to my house again. His face tightened, and he left without another word. I felt shaken but proud for setting a boundary. That evening, I changed the privacy settings on all my social media accounts. I unfollowed the group page and stopped responding to any event invites. I even talked to my neighbor, who agreed to keep an eye out. It felt like taking back a little control. Days passed without seeing him. I slowly relaxed, though the tension had not disappeared completely. I still jogged on my own during odd hours, trying to enjoy the activity without fear. One morning I found a note in my mailbox, unsigned but clearly from him. It said he missed seeing me and hoped I was doing well. I brought the note to the group organizer. She looked concerned and promised to remove him from all group communications. She mentioned she had spoken to him already, and he had agreed to back off. I did not feel comforted, but at least she took me seriously. I also made a report to the local police, just so there was a record of the encounters. For a while, everything stayed quiet. I returned to a new jogging routine at a different park a few towns over. It was further away, but worth the peace of mind. I did not join another group. I preferred to run alone now with headphones in and a new route each week. Months went by without incident. I finally felt like I could breathe again. I even started smiling during my runs, enjoying the crisp air and the solitude. It reminded me why I started jogging in the first place. I felt stronger both mentally and physically. Then one evening, I saw a familiar face at the grocery store. He was walking down an aisle, eyes scanning the shelves, I turned around and left my cart where it was, walking straight to my car. I drove home and sat in my driveway for a long time. The fear returned, sitting heavily in my chest like it had never left. That night, I reviewed everything again. I decided it was time to get a home camera system. I bought a few that week and installed them myself, placing them around the front and back entrances. It gave me a little more confidence. I also started keeping a journal of any strange encounters, just in case. One day, I came home to find a package on my porch. It had no return address, and I had not ordered anything. I picked it up carefully and brought it inside. Inside was a book about running and a handwritten note that said he hoped I was still keeping up with it. That was the final straw. I went back to the police and gave them the package and note. They took it seriously this time and assigned an officer to follow up. I provided all the past notes and explained the full timeline. The officer called him in for questioning, and I was told he denied everything. Still, he was warned and placed under observation. After that visit, the notes and uninvited appearances finally stopped. I never saw him again in my neighborhood, at the store, or on any of my new routes. It took a long time for the anxiety to fade, but it eventually did. I began sleeping through the night again. I started jogging at sunrise, feeling safe in the quiet glow of early light. Eventually, I joined a new fitness community, one focused on mindfulness and safety. It was not a jogging group exactly, but it felt good to connect with others again. I took everything I had learned with me and stayed cautious but open. I even made a few new friends, people who respected space and understood boundaries. Looking back, I still wish I had spoken up sooner. But I also feel proud of how I handled it once I did. I did not let the fear control me forever. I chose to take steps to protect myself and to move forward. Life felt normal again, and for the first time in a long while, I truly felt free. Story 6. The first time I stepped into the apartment, something felt off. It was not the smell or the lighting, but something heavier, something that clung to the walls and the floor like dust no broom could sweep away. The door creaked open slowly, and I stood at the threshold for a long minute before taking the first step. The place was quiet, too quiet, yet it felt like someone was still there, watching from somewhere I could not see. I tried to brush off the feeling and focus on the excitement of moving into a new space, but the unease refused to leave me. The apartment had already been furnished, which the landlord claimed was a convenience, not a red flag. They said the previous tenant had left in a rush and did not bother taking their things. That was strange, but not completely unheard of in the city. People disappeared all the time, some due to financial trouble, others due to emotional crises, and a few for reasons no one ever quite understood. Still, seeing someone else's clothes in the closet and half-used toiletries in the bathroom was more unsettling than I anticipated. I spent the first night on the couch because the bed felt too intimate, too lived in for me to claim right away. As I lay there in the dark, the refrigerator hummed, the pipes groaned, and every shadow seemed to stretch a little too far. Sleep did not come easily, and when it finally did, I woke up multiple times, each time convinced someone was standing at the foot of the couch. I would jolt upright and scan the room, heart pounding, but of course no one was ever there. The next morning I decided to start unpacking and cleaning. I opened every drawer, every cabinet, trying to make the place feel like mine. That was when I found a journal wedged behind a row of books on the shelf. It was leather-bound, with the first page dated over a year ago. I sat down and started reading, expecting grocery lists or daily complaints, but what I found was much darker. The entries were scattered, fragmented, as if the person had started to lose track of time. They talked about feeling watched, about things being moved when they were sure they had not touched them. There were pages filled with questions, notes to self about checking the locks again, and drawings of a shadowy figure in the corners of the rooms. I wanted to stop reading, but I could not. I had already felt some of those same things, and that terrified me. I closed the journal and locked it in a drawer. I told myself it was just a story. The previous tenant must have been going through a difficult time. People write strange things when they are alone too long. That night I forced myself to sleep in the bedroom. I put clean sheets on the bed, tried not to think about who had slept there before me, and turned off the light. I woke up at exactly 2 a.m. sweating and disoriented. A noise had pulled me out of sleep, a soft thump, like something falling to the floor. I listened hard, holding my breath. There it was again, coming from the living room. I got up slowly, tiptoed to the door, and peeked out into the hall. Nothing looked out of place, but the tension in the air made my skin crawl. I turned on all the lights and checked the locks, the windows, even the closets. Nothing, but as I was heading back to bed, I noticed a photo on the fridge that had not been there before. It was a Polaroid, faded and slightly torn at the edges. It showed the same couch I had slept on, but the image was old, and there was a person sitting on it, face blurred out or perhaps scratched away. I threw the photo in the trash and convinced myself I had simply overlooked it during the move. I stopped reading the journal. I stopped snooping through the drawers. I decided to ignore everything and just live in the apartment as if none of it mattered. Days passed, then a week, and things began to settle. I even started to feel comfortable. The tension started to fade, and the apartment began to feel like home. Then one afternoon, while cleaning under the kitchen sink, I found a box duct taped shut. It was hidden behind some old cleaning supplies. My curiosity got the better of me. I peeled off the tape and opened it slowly. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in the same handwriting as the journal. They were never sent, just dated and addressed to no one. The letters described moments of fear and loneliness. They mentioned things like cold spots in the room, voices whispering from behind the walls, dreams that felt more real than waking life. The writer begged someone, anyone, to come and check on them. Reading those letters felt like looking into a mirror. I had started to experience similar things, but I had chalked them up to imagination or stress. I burned the letters in the sink. I opened the windows to let the smoke out, hoping to purge the strange energy from the apartment. I did not want to know more. I did not want to go deeper into whatever mystery the last tenant had left behind. I just wanted a fresh start, a clean break from whatever had happened before I arrived. One evening I decided to rearrange the living room. But while moving the couch, I found a set of keys taped to the underside of the frame. They did not belong to anything in the apartment. I put them in a drawer and left them there, unsure what to do. I did not want to ask the landlord. I did not want to dig further into someone else's secrets. But late that night I changed my mind. I took the keys and searched the hallway. At the end of the corridor was a utility closet I had never seen open. One of the keys fit. Inside were cleaning supplies, some boxes, and a duffel bag. I pulled the bag out and opened it on the floor. It was filled with clothes, a wallet, and a phone with a dead battery. I turned everything over to the police the next day, I told them what I found, how I moved in and discovered these things. They asked questions I could not answer. I did not know where the previous tenant went. I did not know why they left so suddenly or what they were afraid of. But I did the right thing. I handed it over and walked away. After that, the apartment began to feel lighter. No more shadows, no more cold spots. I started sleeping through the night. I cleaned out the closet and made space for my own clothes. The bed felt like mine now. The rooms no longer held whispers or secrets. Weeks passed and life settled into a rhythm. I worked, I cooked, I even invited a few friends over. No one felt anything strange about the place. No one mentioned bad energy or uneasy feelings. I stopped thinking about the journal, the letters, the photos, and the locked closet. But I kept one thing as a reminder. Tucked inside a drawer was the key that had opened the utility closet. It stayed there, untouched, a token of the story I had walked into, and the choice I made to walk out of it the right way. I did not solve the mystery, but I honored it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Story 7. I never meant to stay long at that party. It was one of those underground gatherings that a friend of a friend mentioned in passing, the kind you only find out about through whispers or vague directions. I was curious more than anything else, and boredom had been weighing me down lately. The music was too loud, the lights too dim, and the air too thick with smoke and sweat. I only planned to hang around for a while, just long enough to feel like I had done something different. The last thing I remembered was sipping from a bottle someone handed me. It tasted odd, but I shrugged it off. After all, I was in an unfamiliar space surrounded by strangers acting like old friends. The bass thudded in my chest, and the room spun a little too fast. That was the moment everything started to blur. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer at the party. I was lying on a thin mattress in a room that had no windows and smelled like damp concrete. The walls were painted a dull gray, peeling in patches, and the only light came from a flickering bulb screwed into the ceiling. My head ached, and my limbs felt heavy as if I had been asleep for far too long. Panic rushed in before I could think clearly. I sat up slowly, trying to gather my thoughts. Around me were 5 others, none of whom I recognized. They were groggy too, blinking at the light, stretching sore limbs, or hugging themselves in silence. One person stared at the door as if expecting it to swing open at any moment. No one spoke right away, and I did not know if I should be the one to break the silence. I stood up and took cautious steps across the room. The walls were solid, no cracks to peek through, no hidden vents or panels. I knocked on the door. It was metal and cold, without a handle on our side. No sounds came from the other side, and there was no response. I looked back at the others, but their blank expressions gave me nothing. After a long silence, one of them finally spoke. Their voice was hoarse and uncertain, asking if anyone remembered how they got here. One by one, we shared fragments of memory, pieces that added up to the same confusion. We had all been at the party, drank something strange, and then nothing. Whatever happened after that was a blank space in our minds. I tried not to panic, but my heart beat faster with each passing second. There was no sense of time in that room, no clue whether it was day or night outside. Hunger and thirst crept in slowly. A small metal panel in the corner of the room suddenly opened with a hiss, and a tray slid out. It had bottles of water and what looked like protein bars. That was the first sign that someone out there was watching us. The water tasted clean but flat. I ate slowly, still watching the panel, half expecting a camera or someone to speak through it. But nothing happened. After the tray slid back inside and the panel closed, we were left with silence again. A silence so heavy it felt like another person in the room. The days blurred together, if they were even days at all. The lights never turned off, the food came like clockwork, and no one came in or out. Some of us tried to keep track of time by counting how long it took between meals. Others gave up and sat in corners, lost in their own thoughts. I refused to let go of the idea that I could get out. I started testing every inch of the room. I knocked on walls, tapped the floor, looked under the mattress. Nothing stood out. The air vent above us was too small to crawl through, and even if it were possible, we had no tools, nothing sharp, nothing that could help us escape. The silence between us grew louder than any words. Then one day the door finally opened. It was sudden, without warning, just a loud metallic click, and it swung inward. A bright hallway waited outside, but no one stood there. I felt a wave of hesitation run through me, and I was not alone in that. None of us moved right away. The open door could have been a trick. I was the first to walk forward. My steps echoed in the hall, and I turned to see the others slowly follow. We moved as a group, cautiously, quietly. The hallway led to a staircase that spiraled up into darkness. We climbed, unsure of what waited above. After what felt like hours, we reached a metal door with a keypad. The numbers glowed faintly, and below them was a handwritten note taped to the wall. It said we had one chance, no instructions, no clues, just that warning. We stood there, confused, afraid to press anything. I do not know what pushed me to try. Maybe it was desperation or the idea that we could not stay in that place any longer. I looked at the numbers and chose a date from my memory. The day of the party. I typed it in slowly, praying I was not making a mistake. When I hit enter, the door clicked. It opened to the outside world. Real sunlight poured in, blinding and warm. We stepped out into an empty field, surrounded by tall grass and trees. There was no building behind us, just a path that led away into the woods. We had no idea where we were, but we were free. We walked for hours, following the dirt path until we reached a road. A car passed and we waved it down. The driver looked shocked to see us, but they pulled over. They called 911 and gave us food and blankets from the back seat. I remember sitting on the roadside, the grass brushing against my arms, feeling more real than anything had in days. At the hospital, they ran tests and asked questions. I answered what I could. They told us we were dehydrated and likely drugged. The place we described could not be found. Authorities searched the area, but there was no sign of a bunker or building, just woods and rocks. It was as if the place had vanished. In the days that followed, I kept thinking about what happened, about why we were taken, who was behind it, and what they wanted. I had no answers. None of us did. But I was alive, and that mattered. I went back to my life slowly. I changed my number, moved apartments, stopped going to parties. The idea of being surrounded by strangers now filled me with unease. I started focusing on things that felt real, things I could hold in my hands, measure, understand. I did not want to be caught off guard again. I see the world differently now. I listen more closely, trust less quickly, and notice things I used to overlook. Sometimes I still wake up thinking I am back in that room. But then I see the sunlight filtering through my window, and I remind myself that I made it out. I survived, and I will never let something like that happen again. Story 8. I matched with someone online a few weeks before we met. We had exchanged messages that slowly turned into long nightly conversations. They told me about their life, their hobbies, their goals, and how much they valued honesty. I liked the way they spoke about family and the future. Everything they said made them seem grounded, respectful, and sincere. By the time we agreed to meet in person, I felt like I already knew them. We chose a quiet cafe in a neighborhood I was familiar with. I arrived first and picked a table near the window. I remember checking my reflection on my phone camera just to make sure I looked all right. When they walked in, I recognized them immediately from their photos. They smiled, walked over, and greeted me like we were old friends. Their voice matched the calls we had shared, and their presence seemed comfortable. We ordered coffee, then talked about the little things at first. The conversation flowed easily, and I kept thinking I had made a great decision to give them a chance. But small cracks started to show halfway through our date. They mentioned a job they had previously described very differently online. The company name they gave was not the same, and when I asked for clarification, they brushed it off like it was a minor detail. That struck me as strange because they had gone into such detail before. I noticed they were avoiding eye contact when I brought it up. Still, I did not want to jump to conclusions. I gave them the benefit of the doubt and shifted the conversation to something lighter. They told a story about growing up in a small town, but the name of the town was different from what they had mentioned in our earlier chats. It was not a slight variation, but a completely different place. I asked if they had moved around a lot, and again, they gave a vague response. That was when I started paying closer attention. I replayed our conversations in my mind and realized several details did not add up. They once said they had a younger sister, but now they were talking about being an only child. The more I listened, the more inconsistencies I noticed. My stomach twisted a little, but I stayed calm. I asked specific questions, not in an accusatory way, but in a curious tone. They became visibly nervous, their answers slower and more hesitant. I could see them thinking hard before responding, trying to stitch together their story. It felt like I was talking to someone who was performing, not someone being real. That easy connection from before started to feel artificial. Then I brought up a charity event they claimed to volunteer for, something that made me admire them at first. I asked how the event went last month. They paused and said it was canceled. I knew it was not, because I had looked it up and even considered attending. That was the moment I knew for sure. I leaned back in my chair and quietly observed them as they tried to shift the topic again. They mentioned a movie they claimed to love, but now they acted like they had never seen it. The contradictions were piling up fast. I realized the person in front of me was not who they claimed to be. It was not just about changing a few details to impress someone, but it was a web of lies. I felt disappointed more than anything else. I had opened up to them, trusted their words, and believed they were genuine. I thought back to the late-night calls, the laughter, and the small confessions. None had felt real anymore. I wondered if they had practiced the entire persona before even matching with me. I decided not to confront them directly in public, but I did not want a scene or a dramatic exit. Instead, I smiled politely and said I needed to leave soon due to work. They seemed relieved and nodded, probably realizing I had figured them out. As we stood up, they tried to suggest we meet again sometime. I gave a vague response and walked out. The cool air outside felt refreshing. I took a deep breath and let it all sink in. The night that started with hope had ended with a quiet sense of betrayal. I walked to my car, locked the doors, and just sat there for a moment. I replayed the date in my head again, this time noticing every red flag I had ignored at first. Later that night, I deleted their number and unmatched them online. I did not send a message or try to demand explanations. I figured that if someone could lie so easily, there was no point in chasing the truth from them. Instead, I spent time reflecting on what I had learned from the experience. It made me realize how important it is to protect my time, my trust, and my heart. It also reminded me not to blame myself for someone else's choices. I had entered that situation with honesty and an open mind. I had been sincere, and that mattered more than how the date turned out. I deserved someone who could match that sincerity, not pretend to. And I knew I would find that one day with someone who did not need to invent a version of themselves to be liked. I told a close friend about what happened, just to let it out. They reminded me that this kind of thing happens more often than people think. It made me feel less alone, and I appreciated the reminder that being cautious is not the same as being closed off. I promised myself I would keep trying, but with better filters and a sharper sense of judgment. In the days that followed, I returned to my normal routine. I worked, spent time with family, and focused on the things that brought me joy. The experience stayed with me, not as a scar but as a lesson. It taught me to look beyond words and pay attention to actions. It helped me grow stronger without turning bitter. Eventually, I went on another date with someone new. I was nervous, but I reminded myself not to carry past disappointment into new beginnings. This time, the conversation was easy and honest. There were no grand stories, no exaggerated claims, just real talk about everyday life. It felt refreshing. As we walked through the park after our coffee, I felt a quiet peace. I knew I would be fine whether or not this person turned into something serious. That I had not lost my ability to believe, only refined the way I chose to give it. Sometimes the best thing that comes from a lie is the strength to find something real. And this time I was ready. Story 9. It was a quiet start. I had just begun my night shift at the gas station on the edge of town. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the convenience store. The lot was mostly empty except for a couple of parked trucks and the occasional car passing through. I did not expect anything unusual, just another long night with coffee and the radio for company. The first couple of nights were uneventful. I familiarized myself with the layout, learned how to check the pumps, and kept the shelves stocked. The store was old but functional, with a small stockroom in the back behind a narrow hallway. I had not spent much time in there yet, only stepping in to grab extra boxes of snacks or cleaning supplies. It felt a little cramped, and the overhead bulb flickered sometimes, which made it less inviting. On the third night, I noticed something odd. One of the boxes of energy drinks looked like it had been opened and resealed with tape that did not match the rest. At first, I thought it was just how it came from the supplier, but something about the uneven edges caught my attention. Then I lifted it and felt that it weighed less than it should have. I opened the box to find that half the cans were missing. I checked the delivery log, but there were no notes about damaged or opened boxes. Everything had been signed off as intact. The previous shift had already left, and I had no way of asking them about it until the next day. I brushed it off, assuming maybe someone had pulled stock and forgotten to update the records. Still, it felt careless and out of the ordinary. Around 2 a.m., I decided to sweep the back hallway and check the stockroom. As I opened the door, a strange smell hit me. It was not strong, but it lingered. A mix of stale food, sweat, and something metallic. The kind of smell that tells you someone has been in a place they should not be. I turned the light on, and it flickered weakly before holding. Everything looked normal at first glance. Boxes were stacked, cleaning supplies sat on metal shelves, and nothing looked out of place. But then I noticed a blanket tucked between a pile of cardboard boxes in the corner. It was dark blue and looked worn, with a few crumbs on it like someone had eaten there recently. My heart beat faster as I stepped closer. Beside the blanket was an empty water bottle and a wrapper from a granola bar we did not even sell. I knelt and pulled the boxes aside to reveal more signs that someone had been staying there. A pair of old shoes, a small flashlight, and a torn-up book with scribbled notes in the margins. I stood up quickly and locked the stockroom door behind me. I returned to the front, trying to stay calm. The security cameras had a blind spot that covered most of the stockroom entrance. Whoever had been hiding there must have known that. I picked up the phone and called my manager, but there was no answer. I was not sure what to do next. It did not feel like an emergency, not yet. But I could not just ignore it. I decided to check the outside of the building. I walked the perimeter with the flashlight, my eyes scanning the shadows. The back door had a padlock, but it looked like it had been tampered with. The metal was scratched, and the latch seemed loose. I went back inside and locked the front doors just in case. The rest of the shift passed without incident, but I could not shake the feeling that someone had been watching me. Every sound made me jump. Every creak of the floor felt louder than it should have. When the sun finally rose, I was exhausted but relieved. I told the morning staff about what I had found, and they agreed to check the security footage. It showed nothing unusual, just me moving around the store and stocking shelves. But that only proved that whoever had been hiding in the stockroom knew how to stay hidden. They must have slipped in before the cameras turned on for the night or found a blind spot. Later that day, the manager called me and confirmed someone had definitely been inside. He found more wrappers and a makeshift pillow stuffed behind a stack of paper towels. He was going to file a report and change the locks. He also said he would install another camera to cover the back hallway and stockroom door. I returned from my shift that night, feeling uneasy but determined to stay alert. The air still carried that stale scent, like whoever had been there had only just left. I checked the stockroom first thing and found it empty. The blanket and other items were gone, but the memory of them lingered. Around 3 a.m., I heard a soft noise from the back. It sounded like something scraping against the wall. I grabbed the flashlight and walked slowly down the hallway. The door to the stockroom was still locked, but the sound seemed to come from the utility closet beside it. I opened the closet and found nothing. But when I turned around, I saw the hallway door leading to the restrooms slightly ajar. I had locked that earlier. I took a deep breath and stepped closer, pushing the door open. The restroom lights were off, but I saw the faint shape of someone moving. I did not confront them. Instead, I backed away and returned to the front to call for help. This time, I called 911. I told them someone was hiding in the building and might still be inside. The dispatcher kept me on the line while officers were sent to the station. They arrived 10 minutes later and swept the building. They found a man curled up behind the restroom door, thin and dirty, holding a half-eaten sandwich he must have taken from the break room fridge. He did not fight. He just looked tired and scared. They let him out without much resistance. Later, I learned that he had been living behind the gas station for weeks, slipping in at night to sleep and eat. He never meant to hurt anyone. He had lost his job and home and found the stockroom by chance. It was warm, quiet, and nobody checked it often. He thought he could hide there until he figured something out. I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, fear, and sympathy. He had scared me, yes, but he had also reminded me of how quickly life can unravel. It made me appreciate the small things more. My job, even if it was long and lonely, gave me stability. After that night, things changed at the gas station. The locks were upgraded, cameras installed in every hallway, and the manager checked the stockroom every day. I still worked the night shift, but I felt safer knowing someone had taken the warning seriously. I started carrying a small notebook to track anything unusual, just in case. Each shift felt more routine again, the way it had in the beginning. Customers came and went, coffee brewed, the radio played soft music in the background. I kept my eyes open, but nothing strange happened after that. The building felt lighter, the air clearer, and the sense of dread faded with time. I never saw the man again. I hope he found help somewhere. I still think about him sometimes, especially when I walk by the stockroom or check the break room fridge. It reminds me that people can fall through the cracks and sometimes they just need a place to feel safe for a while. It made me more cautious but also more compassionate. That job taught me more than how to run a register or stock a shelf. It taught me to notice the quiet things, to listen to what the silence tries to tell you. Sometimes danger does not come with a scream or a crash. Sometimes it tiptoes in, curls up in a corner, and waits to be noticed. And sometimes, when you finally see it, all you can do is face it with a steady heart. Story 10. I booked a solo cabin retreat in the mountains, far from the noise of the city, hoping to find peace and maybe clear my thoughts. It was a small wooden structure surrounded by thick pine trees, with a porch facing east and a single path leading up from the forest road. I brought books, a journal, some food, and enough supplies to last a week. There was no cell service, no internet, and no people for miles. It was exactly what I had wanted. The first day passed quietly. I unpacked, made tea, and sat on the porch to watch the sun set behind the trees. By evening, the wind picked up and brought with it a chill, so I built a fire in the stone hearth inside. The silence was unlike anything I had felt in a long time. It was not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. That night I slept deeply, the kind of sleep that comes only when the body knows there is nothing to do but rest. I woke at dawn and made coffee, while the light filtered through the tall windows. As I stepped outside with my mug in hand, I noticed something strange near the door. There were footprints in the dirt, fresh ones, not mine. I had not seen or heard anyone, and I knew for a fact that no one had passed by the cabin during the day before. They were human footprints, bare and leading from the path toward the porch, then looping back. The shape of them made my stomach knot. It looked like someone had been standing just a few feet away from my door for a while. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had somehow walked there without remembering, or maybe an animal with strange paws had left the marks. But deep down I knew better. I brushed the prints away with a branch and told myself not to overthink. The rest of the day I tried to distract myself. I hiked a short trail nearby, gathered firewood, and read by the fireplace. By evening, I had almost forgotten about the prints. I locked the door and shut the curtains before going to bed, the way I always did back home. When I stepped outside the next morning, they were there again. The same footprints in the same spot, just outside my door. This time I felt a tightness in my chest. They were not there the evening before, and I had checked. Whoever it was had come while I was sleeping. I had not heard a thing. I stood for a long time staring at them, the steam from my coffee rising in the cold air. Something was wrong. I was sure of it now. I had chosen this cabin because it was remote, and the nearest neighbor was about a mile away. No one should be out here. I went back inside, locked the door again, and checked the windows. Everything was untouched. I tried not to panic, but the quiet that had comforted me before now felt heavy. I left the prints where they were this time. If they came again, I wanted to know. That day I stayed close to the cabin. I made noise when I walked, banged pots together when I cooked, and kept the axe I used for firewood close by. I felt ridiculous, but I could not shake the feeling that someone was watching. As evening came, I lit more lamps than usual and kept the fire going strong. I barely slept that night. Every creak in the wood, every gust of wind brushing the windows made my pulse quicken. I woke several times and sat up, straining to hear beyond the walls. But there was nothing. Just the wind and the ticking of the old clock on the shelf. Morning came slowly. I opened the door and looked down. There were new prints. This time they circled the cabin completely. Whoever it was had walked all the way around, even stood under the bedroom window. I felt sick. My legs were shaking. I did not know what to do. There was no phone service, no way to call anyone. I could hike back to the car, but that meant leaving the safety of the cabin and walking nearly 2 miles through the woods. I decided to wait, just one more day. If it happened again, I would leave. To pass the time, I wrote in my journal. I wrote down everything I remembered about the prints, about the soundless nights, about how I felt. I checked the doors again, tested the locks, and kept the axe closer now, even when I sat to eat. By nightfall, I had made up my mind. If there were more prints the next morning, I would leave right after sunrise. I packed most of my things and left my boots by the bed. I kept my clothes on as I lay down, fully alert, eyes open in the dark. At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke in the early morning, heart pounding, to the sound of nothing at all. I waited until the first light crept through the cracks in the curtains, then walked slowly to the door. I opened it. There were no new prints. The dirt was undisturbed. I stepped outside carefully, looking all around. Still nothing. I felt a cautious wave of relief wash over me. Maybe whoever it was had moved on. Maybe it was over. Still, I was not ready to stay another night. I gathered the last of my things, double-checked the cabin, and set out on the path back to my car. The trees seemed less menacing in the morning light. I kept checking behind me, half expecting to see someone following. But there was no one. When I reached the road and saw my car still parked where I had left it, I almost laughed. I climbed in, locked the doors, and sat there for a long time before turning the engine on. The heater hummed to life, and I finally allowed myself to breathe. I did not go back to that cabin. I never told anyone about the footprints part of me still wonders who it was, why they came, and why they stopped. I will never know. But I do know that the peace I found after leaving felt deeper than anything I had hoped to find during the retreat. It reminded me that solitude is not always silent and peace is not always still. Sometimes the quiet carries its own echoes, and sometimes the most unsettling things are the ones that come and go without a sound. I still take trips alone, but I choose places where people live nearby. I keep my phone charged. I leave no part of me unguarded. But I am not afraid anymore. The unknown came close, and I met it with fear, yes, but also with strength I did not know I had. And when it left, I remained whole, changed, but not broken. That, to me, is the real peace I was always searching for. Story 11. When I first moved into the apartment, I felt a sense of relief. The place was small but clean, affordable, and close enough to walk to work. I had been searching for a while, and this one finally checked all the boxes. It was not perfect, but I liked the layout and the view from the window. It felt like a fresh start. The walls were a bit thin, though. I could sometimes hear the neighbor coughing, talking on the phone, or playing music late at night. It was never too loud to be unbearable, just enough to remind me someone was always just on the other side. I never saw them in the hallway, which was odd given how close the apartments were. Maybe they worked late hours or kept to themselves. I spent most of my evenings reading or watching shows online, enjoying the quiet. One night, while rearranging some furniture, I noticed something strange on the wall that connected my bedroom to the neighboring unit. There was a small mark behind my dresser, no bigger than a coin. At first, I thought it was a nail hole or something from a previous tenant. Out of curiosity, I leaned closer and saw that it was actually a tiny hole, deliberately made and positioned at eye level. It looked like it had been carefully drilled, not just a random crack or accident. My stomach turned a little. I bent down and peered through it, but it was too dark on the other side to see anything clearly. I stood there for a long time, staring at that hole. It felt wrong, like something was watching me, even though I knew I was alone in the room. I pushed the dresser back in place, aligning it to cover the hole again. That night I could not sleep well. My thoughts kept circling back to the possibility that someone had been watching me. The next morning I went to the leasing office to ask about the neighbor. They told me the person had lived there for a few years, paid rent on time, and had never caused any problems. They asked if anyone had complained about strange behavior. They shook their heads and said not that they could recall. I did not know what to do. I felt like I needed proof before making any serious accusation. So I bought a small camera, the kind that looked like a USB charger, and plugged it into the outlet facing the dresser. It was positioned to catch any movement in the room when I was not there. I told myself it was probably nothing, but I needed peace of mind. For the next few days, I left the camera running when I went to work. At night, I would review the footage quickly before bed. Nothing unusual happened for a while. I began to feel like I was just being paranoid. But then, after nearly a week, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In one of the recordings, around 11 a.m., the dresser shifted slightly, just enough to uncover part of the hole. A few minutes later, a shadow passed behind it. Then a single eye appeared. It hovered there for almost 30 seconds, just staring into the room. I paused the video and replayed it several times, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I felt sick. Someone had been watching me, not just once, but likely many times before I even knew the hole existed. I saved the footage and backed it up on several devices. The next day, I went back to the leasing office and asked to speak with the building manager. I showed them the video, trying to keep my voice steady. They were shocked and promised to investigate immediately. Later that afternoon, maintenance went into the neighboring unit under the pretense of routine inspection. The hole was found on their side too, concealed behind a bookshelf. The neighbor acted confused, denying everything, but the evidence was too clear. The manager told me that they would be addressing the issue seriously. I was offered another unit in the building, far from that side, and they even waived the transfer fees. I packed my things that same night. As I moved out, I kept glancing at the wall, half expecting to see the eye return. In the new unit, I took extra steps to ensure privacy. I checked every wall, corner, and closet before unpacking anything. I even put up soundproofing foam along the bedroom wall, just for peace of mind. It took me a while to feel comfortable again, to walk around without the sense of being watched. Looking back, I realized how important it is to trust your instincts. That strange feeling, the unease, it was my mind picking up on something I could not yet explain. I was lucky to have found that hole before things got worse. Who knows how long it had been there, or what else had been seen. Eventually, the fear faded, replaced by a sense of control. I had caught it, taken action, and moved on. I started sleeping better and enjoying the space again. My routines returned, and life began to feel normal. There was a comfort in knowing I had not ignored the signs. I never saw that neighbor again. The management said they were reviewing whether to terminate the lease. I did not ask for details. I just wanted to move forward. Still, every so often, I would check my walls just to be sure. That experience changed how I viewed privacy. It is easy to assume your space is your own, but that is not always true. I became more aware, more cautious, but not fearful. I learned how to protect myself without giving in to paranoia. Now, when I talk to people about apartments or roommates, I always tell them to inspect everything, even the parts no one thinks to check. The hole in the wall may seem small, but it can carry a heavy weight. I hope no one else has to go through something like that. And if they do, I hope they trust themselves enough to act. Story 12. I had signed up for the community event a few weeks earlier, mostly to meet people and do something productive with my weekend. The local park was hosting a charity fair with free health checkups, food stalls, and small shows to support local causes. I was assigned to help with logistics, which meant setting up tables, guiding people, and making sure the support vans were stocked and in the right place. It was the kind of work that kept my hands busy and my mind at ease. The morning began smoothly, with volunteers arriving in waves and the crowd growing steadily. The support vans were stationed at the edge of the space, just beyond the main tents. These vans were used to deliver supplies, store emergency kits, and in some cases transport people with limited mobility. I was asked to check the supply boxes in one of the vans since someone had reported missing blankets and water bottles. I walked over, clipboard in hand, ready to make a quick inventory. When I opened the back doors of the van, I expected to see crates of bottled water in sealed containers. Instead, I found rows of large black bags, not labeled or sorted. At first, I thought it was just a mix-up, that maybe they were misplaced or part of another delivery. But as I unzipped one of the bags, confusion quickly turned into dread, for inside were personal items that did not make sense together, like several phones without chargers, a handful of passports, and a few children's toys. None of it was labeled, and none of it belonged in a supply van for a community event. I backed out of the van and looked around, but no one was nearby. I checked the event list to see who had access to this van and found no information about it. I climbed back in and opened more of the bags, each one stranger than the last. One had clothing in several sizes, clearly used, while another had sealed envelopes filled with cash. It was like I had stumbled onto something that was never meant to be found. I felt a chill crawl down my spine as I realized what this might mean. The van had tinted windows, no markings, and a fake permit hanging on the mirror that did not match the registration number on the side. I took a photo of the permit and stepped outside again, pretending to check something on my clipboard in case anyone was watching. But my heart was pounding, but I tried to keep my expression neutral. I knew I could not ignore this. I walked back to the main tent where one of the coordinators was handing out assignments. I pulled them aside quietly and mentioned that something was wrong with one of the vans. They looked confused and told me all vans were accounted for, each registered and inspected before the event. I asked them to double-check the list, especially the one near the east fence. After a minute, they confirmed that no van was supposed to be parked in that spot. That was all I needed to hear. I thanked them and walked away, not toward the van but toward a more private area where I could make a call. I dialed 911 and told the dispatcher what I had seen without adding too much speculation. I gave them the van's location, description, and plate number. The dispatcher asked me to stay nearby but not to approach the vehicle again. They assured me officers would be dispatched immediately. I returned to the event area but kept my distance from the van. I went back to helping with small tasks, moving water jugs and setting up chairs, anything to blend in. My hands were shaking a little, but I forced myself to stay calm. It felt like every minute dragged on, but about 20 minutes later I saw 2 police cars pull up quietly near the back entrance of the park. Plainclothes officers stepped out and walked toward the van. I did not approach them, but I watched from the corner of a tent as they examined the permit and the van. Within minutes, more officers arrived, and the event was gently shifted to a close. Organizers told people that unexpected maintenance was underway and asked everyone to begin wrapping up early. Most people left without question, and volunteers were told to check out and head home. I lingered nearby, and when one of the officers approached me, I told them what I had found and how I had discovered it. They took my statement in a quiet corner, far from the remaining crowd. The officer nodded often, asked clear questions, and thanked me for reporting it. I learned that the van had no connection to the event and was likely using the crowd as cover for something much worse. What I had stumbled upon was indeed part of something larger. Later that evening, I received a follow-up call letting me know that they had taken several people into custody who were linked to the vehicle. They confirmed that the van was being used to move people, primarily undocumented minors, from one location to another. It was part of a human trafficking operation that had been under investigation for months. My call and my discovery had helped them make a major breakthrough. I sat in silence for a while, trying to process everything. The next day, the news was already covering the story, though details were still limited. I kept my name out of it and did not speak to anyone about what had happened. The officers told me I might be contacted again for further questions, but for now, I had done everything I needed to. The weight of what I had seen stayed with me. The idea that something so horrifying had been hiding in plain sight left a mark I would not soon forget. Still, I was glad I had done something. It would have been easy to walk away, to assume it was someone else's responsibility. But I did not. I had acted, and that made a difference. I thought about the people who might now have a chance to get to safety because of it. That thought gave me some peace. In the days that followed, I kept volunteering, though I asked to be placed on different assignments. I knew I would never look at those events the same way again, but I also knew the work mattered. The coordinators reached out to thank me privately, and security at future events became tighter. More volunteers were trained on how to report suspicious activity, and more care was taken with the vehicles allowed into the event area. I carried that moment with me, a reminder that sometimes doing the right thing means stepping into something frightening. I had not gone looking for trouble. I just wanted to help. But when the truth showed itself, I faced it, and I did not back down. I could live with that. I had done what needed to be done, and I had helped someone without even knowing their name. Story 13. It was close to 11 p.m. when I got to the bus stop. The street was mostly empty except for a few cars passing now and then. The lights from nearby shops cast long shadows on the sidewalk, and a cool breeze carried the scent of rain in the air. I stood beneath the dim light of the shelter, glancing at my phone to check the bus schedule. The screen told me I had 10 more minutes to wait. I leaned against the glass and tried to stay alert, aware of how late it was. It had been a long day, and all I wanted was to get home, take a shower, and crawl into bed. The neighborhood was not exactly dangerous, but I had always been cautious when out late. A few other people stood nearby at first, but they eventually walked off or caught earlier buses. Soon I was the only one left. That was when I noticed him approaching. He walked slowly, hands in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on me with a strange kind of calm. At first I assumed he was just another passenger. He looked average, someone you would not look at twice during the day. But there was something about the way he moved, something too deliberate. From that point forward, I kept a closer eye on the little things. I trusted my instincts more and paid attention when something felt off. I did not become fearful or isolated. I just became smarter and more cautious. It was not a bad thing to be careful. I began enjoying my daily routines again, going to the store without hesitation and taking weekend drives without checking under the car first. The fear that once clung to everything I did finally began to fade. I even returned some of the smart devices to my home, more aware now of how to control their settings. Life felt normal again, or at least a better version of normal. Looking back, I still do not know who placed that tracker. But I do know that it did not break me. It did not take away my strength or ability to live freely. I turned the experience into something that